At this rate, you'll never get married, Eli Mercer said, grinning over his coffee while rain battered the Bell house porch roof like knuckles on a coffin lid. Clara Bell, sleeves rolled to her elbows, lamplight warming the copper in her dark hair, did not laugh. She set a tray of clean glasses on the bar, looked at him through the smoke, and whispered, "Only if you ask me." Then she smiled. The grin slid off Eli's face so fast the whole room felt it. 3 trail hands froze over their cards. A spoon stopped halfway to a miner's mouth. Even the old clock behind the bar seemed to swallow its next tick. Outside, thunder rolled low over Dry Hollow, and the rain came harder, rattling the shutters like a man trying every latch in town. Clara kept polishing a glass. That was the worst of it. She went on working as if she had not just cracked open the quiet shape of Eli's life with 7 soft words. Eli Mercer was not a man easily cornered. He hauled freight between Wichita and the mining camps west of the Cimarron, fixed broken axles with his own hands, judged weather by the taste of the wind, and could track a stolen mule by bent grass under moonlight. The way she hoisted flour sacks without calling for help. The way she stood between drunken miners and the kitchen girl Annie with nothing but a hard look and a dish towel in her hands. The way she counted coins at night, lips moving, humming under her breath as if steadiness could be made from sound. The tiredness under her eyes she thought no one saw. He saw it. That was the trouble. A pan clanged in the kitchen, followed by Annie's sharp yelp. Clara half turned at once, listening. When Annie muttered something annoyed and alive, Clara relaxed. Eli watched that one quick movement and felt the unease under the room grow wider. Clara had not answered like a woman teasing. She had answered like a woman standing at the edge of something already decided. He rose. Boots scraped wood. "You ought not say such things unless you mean them. I don't waste words." She set the glass down. Her smile had gone, leaving only a stillness that made him want to glance toward the door. Least of all tonight. Why tonight? Before she could answer, the front doors banged inward under a gust of wet wind. Deputy Nolan Pike stepped in, hat dripping, slicker shining yellow in the lamplight. He brought the smell of mud, horse sweat, and trouble with him. Pike was a broad man with the slow confidence of someone used to wearing borrowed authority like armor. "Evening," he said, though there was nothing civil in his face. His eyes found Clara first, then Eli, then the room. "Marshal Avery wants the books." Clara's shoulders tightened a fraction. "At supper." "Now." The card players found their cards suddenly fascinating. Annie appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping wet hands on her apron, her young face gone pale. Eli knew Pike well enough to understand this. When Pike used Avery's name, he was either sharpening the marshal's power or enjoying its weight. "Tell the marshal he'll have them in the morning," Clara said. Pike stepped closer. Rainwater dripped from his coat hem to the floorboards. He said, "Now, Miss Bell, owed taxes don't sleep. Neither do men who like taking what isn't theirs." The room tightened like a drawn wire. Pike's jaw shifted. Eli moved before deciding to, resting one hand on the counter between them, not threatening, not yielding. He could smell wet wool, whiskey, and the iron taste of his own rising temper. "She's busy," Eli said. "Morning sounds fair." Pike glanced at Eli's hand, then at his face. "You staying in town long enough to be part of this, Mercer?" "Long enough to hear when a man forgets his manners." Pike smiled, which was worse than anger. He reached into his slicker and laid a folded notice on the bar. 3 days, Miss Bell. Pay what Avery says you owe, or the Bell house gets seized. Stable included. Land behind it, too." Annie made a sound like she had been slapped. Clara did not touch the paper. "We paid county tax in April. This is town levy. New vote. Posted proper." Pike's gaze slid back to Eli. "A man with freight money might help, if he's fond enough of the place." There it was. The insult under the words. Eli kept his face blank, but he felt Clara stiffen at the same moment he did. Pride was the one thing she had never borrowed from anyone. "Get out," she said. Pike did not move. 3 days. After that, the marshal inventories everything. Might include that silver set your aunt left you. Shame when family things get scattered at auction. Eli's hand curled. Clara laid hers over it before he could move. Her fingers were cool from wash water, but the touch struck like flame. She was not looking at him. She was looking at Pike. "Out," she said again. This time Pike tipped 2 fingers to his hat and back toward the door. "Sleep light. Storm's rising. Things get damaged in weather." He went out, and the rain swallowed him whole. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Annie rushed to the bar. "Clara, he can't. We paid." Aunt Ruth said. "I know what Ruth said." Clara picked up the paper, read it once, and all color left her face. Not in fear, but recognition. That frightened Eli more. "You saw this coming," he said. "I saw Avery circling." She folded the notice with careful fingers. "He wants the Bell house because the railroad survey may run behind it come spring. If he gets the lot, he sells triple. And because—" She met his eyes. "Because he asked me once to be agreeable, and I wasn't." Rain hammered harder. Somewhere in the black street a horse screamed and went suddenly silent. Eli felt the town tilt under him. This was not taxes. This was spite with a badge on it. He should have walked away. Freight men survived by keeping their wheels clear of local wars. He knew that the way he knew floodwater hid axle-deep ruts. But Clara stood there, back straight, eyes bright with anger she refused to waste on panic, and he could not make himself step toward safety. "What do you need?" he asked. For the first time that night, she looked shaken. Then the front window exploded. Glass burst inward. Annie screamed. Eli spun, hand going to his revolver, as rain and bright shards sprayed across the floor. In the wreckage lay a stone wrapped in a strip of red cloth. He bent and lifted it. Words were scratched across the rock in black grease. "Marry or leave by Sunday." Clara made a sound so small it hurt to hear. Sewn into the cloth was a single silver button. Eli looked at her. "Your father's." She nodded once. And the storm kept pounding the Bell house as if testing whether its walls, and the people inside them, would hold. A dead man's button is a particular kind of threat. It says, "I know your history. I know what you bury. I can reach into the ground and put my hands on it." Eli set the stone on the bar and stared at the silver button stitched into the cloth. Annie stood rigid near the kitchen door, arms folded tight across her chest, her face too young for the fear in it. Clara did not cry. She did not sway. She only looked at the button as if it were asking something of her. "How many were on his coat?" Eli asked. "5. Her voice was level, but each word seemed placed with care. "Sunday coat. Buried in it 7 years ago." "You checked the grave?" 3 weeks ago the earth looked wrong." She swallowed. "I told myself it was coyotes. I did not want to know better." Eli glanced toward the black window frame. "This isn't a levy dispute." "No," she said. "It's a warning." He took off his hat and set it on the counter, crown down, his old habit when he was forced to think with more than muscle. "Then we go to Judge Talbot. He's in Dodge until Thursday. The county marshal, Avery's brother-in-law. The recorder, owes Avery money." She met his eyes with tired, stubborn honesty. "I have spent 2 months tracing every official door. They all open into the same room." That angered him more than the stone had. Not the corruption itself. He had hauled freight through enough territories to know how law rotted when money got warm enough. What angered him was how long she had carried this alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I did not intend to ask for rescue." The words landed between them hard and clean. Eli nodded once. "Fair. But I didn't offer rescue." "What did you offer?" He looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had held a boarding house together through lean winters and drunken summers, and now stood with her dead father's grave turned into a threat. "Standing beside you," he said, "while you do what you were going to do anyway." Something changed in her face then. Not softness. Recognition. Annie came around the bar and gathered the broken glass into a pan with shaking hands. "We need a witness," she blurted. "Before Pike says this never happened." Clara nodded slowly. "Preacher Sykes." Eli looked up. "He can read. He can read. Right. Remember, and hold a grudge longer than any woman I've ever met," Annie said. "Avery tried to buy the church lot twice. Sykes would rather chew nails than help him." Clara almost smiled. Then it was gone. "We'll need to reach the preacher without passing the marshal's office." "Back lane behind the Tanners," Annie said. "Dark, but faster." Eli looked to Clara. The choice sat there between them, plain as iron. If she stayed still, Avery would come at dawn with papers and witnesses of his own. If she moved under watch. That was the kind of choice bad men forced on decent people. Danger either way, only different shapes of it. Clara reached for the stone, wrapped it in a clean towel, and slid it into her coat pocket. Evidence. She was already thinking ahead. "Annie, bolt every door after us. Answer for no one." Annie nodded. "I know." Eli stepped closer to Clara. If we go out that back way, we may walk into something. If we stay in here, we certainly will." There was no fear in her voice, only arithmetic. They went out through the kitchen. The yard behind the Bell house smelled of wet wood, horse dung, and soaked earth. Rain fell in silver sheets off the stable roof. The alley beyond was narrow and black, hemmed by fence posts and shed walls slick with storm. Eli walked slightly ahead, one hand near his revolver, listening. He could hear water running in the ruts, the distant groan of loose shutters, the sharp hiss of their boots in mud. Clara's shoulder brushed his once when the lane narrowed. She did not step away. The touch felt stranger than it should have. At the far end of the lane, a rider emerged from the dark. He did not rush them. He did not call out. He simply sat his horse sideways across the passage and watched. Lightning flickered far off, throwing his outline into brief, white shape. Hat low, shoulders heavy, one hand resting easy on the saddle horn. Eli stopped. Clara stopped beside him. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then the rider turned his horse and walked it away, slow and unhurried, vanishing back into the rain as if he had only needed to confirm one thing, that they had left the Bell house. "They're watching the exits," Eli said. "Yes." "They expected you to seek help." "Yes." He looked at her. Rain slid from the brim of his hat. "Then they wanted you in the open." Her face tightened. "Yes." That third yes settled it. Avery was no longer circling. He was closing. Clara took Eli's wrist in the dark, firm and brief, and tugged him back toward the house. Not for comfort, for direction, for agreement. They moved fast, close to the wall, shoulders nearly touching, boots slipping through mud and rainwater. The Bell house rose ahead of them, dim and square against the storm, lamplight leaking under the kitchen door. Inside, Annie had already barred everything. Clara peeled off her soaked coat, laid the stone on the table, and exhaled once through her nose. "Tomorrow," she said, "you go to the recorder's office. Ask for every tax filing on this property for 10 years. I'll go to Sykes. You think Pike lets us walk openly now?" "No," she met his gaze. "I think we walk anyway. That's a hard plan. It's the only one I own." He heard the weariness under it then, and the fierce discipline keeping it upright. He took one step closer. "Clara, about what you said before Pike came." Now something like caution entered her eyes. "What about it? You said you don't waste words." "I don't." "Then tell me this plain." He held her gaze. "Was it a joke?" The kitchen lamp hissed softly. Rain drummed over the roof. Annie, sensing the room had become too full for her, slipped into the pantry without a word. Clara looked at Eli a long time. "No," she said at last. "It was not." His breath caught in a place he did not expect. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside the front of the Bell house. Slow, multiple, deliberate. The knock came a moment later. 3 measured blows. And a man's smooth voice through the door said, "Miss Bell, Marshal Avery would like a word." The hoofbeats stopped in the mud outside like nails driven into silence. Eli moved to the wall beside the front window, revolver low in his hand. Clara stood behind the bar, one palm flat on the worn wood, the other hidden below where he guessed a shotgun might be waiting. Annie crouched behind the flower bins in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide and white in the lamplight. The knock came again. "Miss Bell," Avery called, smooth as polished bone. "This is a legal matter. Civil, if you allow it." Civil, a word like a clean glove pulled over a dirty fist. Clara did not look at Eli. She looked at the door. "The Bell house is closed for the night, Marshal." Rain hissed off the porch roof. One horse snorted. Leather creaked outside. "You received the levy notice," Avery said. "I'd prefer this settled without misunderstanding." "It will be settled in writing," Clara replied. "At the county office." A pause. Then, "Who was in there with you?" "Guests." Eli stepped just far enough into the stripe of light from the lamp that a man outside the boarded window might catch his shape. No bravado. No challenge. Just presence. There was a soft murmur outside, voices too low to make out. Then Avery again, colder now. "Mercer. Didn't know you were still in town. Change my schedule. Freight work's unpredictable. So is company, when it turns out better than the road." That earned another silence. Eli could almost hear Avery recalculating beyond the door. Men like him preferred women isolated, disputes private, witnesses manageable. Eli's being here changed the measure of the thing, and Avery knew it. At last Avery spoke. 3 days, Miss Bell. After Sunday, this property falls under town authority. You may still discuss terms if you choose. Clara's voice stayed level. I'll discuss them before witnesses. The hoofbeats started again, slow at first, then receding. Eli did not move for several seconds after the sound faded. They'll be back. Not this way, Clara said. Avery prefers paper in daylight and violence at a distance. She crossed to the kitchen and reached beneath the sideboard. When she came up, she held a short double-barreled shotgun, old and dark and well-kept. Eli raised an eyebrow. My grandfather distrusted peace, she said. That gun still works? Better than most men. Annie let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. The room needed it. Clara checked the shells with practiced hands, then set the shotgun within reach beside the stove. They sat around the kitchen table after that because there was nothing else to do except pretend the night was ordinary. Clara made coffee strong enough to strip wagon paint. Eli kept his revolver beside his cup. Annie wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and fought sleep like it was a moral duty. The rain softened near midnight. The silence afterward felt larger than the storm had. Clara reached into her pocket and laid the silver button on the table between them. Lamplight caught on it, a cold little moon. My father built this place himself, she said quietly. He said a woman needed her own roof over her own business, or the world would forever treat her like borrowed furniture. What was his name? Eli asked. Henry Bell. He nodded. He sounds difficult. He was. A tired smile touched her mouth. And he was usually right. They sat with that a while. Wind moved through the yard, carrying the smell of wet pine, horses, and soaked ashes from some distant chimney. The Bell house creaked softly around them. Then Clara said, Avery never wanted the taxes. He wanted the lot. When the railroad comes, he'll own the storefronts nearest the line. If he gets this stretch too, he controls freight, lodging, grain, and water access for 3 blocks. Eli looked up sharply. That's not greed. That's strategy. Yes. And the marriage threat. This time her expression changed. Something harder, more private. Avery once told me a woman alone should attach herself to stronger protection before men began making decisions for her. I told him if I ever married, it would be for love, not shelter. Eli stared at the button. So now he means to decide the matter for you. Yes. The words sat between them like smoke. He rubbed his thumb along the rim of his cup. What if you walked away? Sold nothing. Left before Sunday. She looked at him with steady disappointment. Would you? He did not answer because he could not. Exactly, she said. That stung, not because it was unfair, but because it was perfectly fair. She would not abandon her father's house, Annie's future, and the one thing she had built with both hands just because a powerful man had become cruel. Eli knew that now. More than that, he admired her for it in a way that was getting dangerous. Annie finally fell asleep in the corner chair, head tilted sideways, blanket slipping to the floor. Clara rose and tucked it back around her. When she straightened, Eli saw the weariness in the slow roll of her shoulders, the strain she had hidden all night. Sit, he said. I am sitting. Properly. Before you fall down. Something flickered in her eyes. She came back to the table and sat across from him. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Eli said, What you said tonight. A sound at the back door cut him off. Not a knock. A shift. 1 inch of wood testing the bolt. Eli was on his feet instantly, revolver up. Clara snatched the shotgun from beside the stove and brought both hammers back with a metallic click that turned the whole kitchen to ice. They stood together facing the door. 3 heartbeats. 4. Then footsteps retreated slowly through the mud outside. Unhidden, deliberate. Not trying to enter. Only proving they had been close enough to try. Annie woke with a gasp. What was that? Clara did not lower the gun. Nothing getting in. The words were strong. Her hands were stronger. Dawn crept under the kitchen door an hour later, thin and gray. Eli had not slept. Clara had not either. When morning finally touched the Bell house windows, the light found them still standing on the same side of the table, armed, tired, and far past pretending any of this could be survived alone. Outside, a riderless horse wandered down the street dragging a broken lead rope. Tied to the rope was a strip of red cloth. And everyone in the Bell house understood that Sunday was no longer a deadline. It was a countdown. Morning after hard rain always smells like a world trying to start again. Washed earth, pine, damp boards, coffee. Clara made the good coffee, Not the bitter thin brew she served trail hands. Real beans, kept in a sealed tin Annie was forbidden to touch without permission. She ground them herself and boiled them in a dented copper pot, while pale light eased across the kitchen table. Eli sat there with his revolver disassembled before him, cleaning each piece with an oily rag, and watched her move through the room with that same efficient steadiness that had first caught his eye months ago. "You sleep?" he asked. Enough to remain impolite. She set a cup in front of him and took the chair across from his. Not the far chair. The one directly opposite. "You? I don't sleep well in chairs. You could have taken a room. And left you watching the doors alone?" He shook his head. "No." A corner of her mouth moved. "You are an inconvenient man, Eli Mercer. I'm learning that." Annie drifted in half awake, hair pinned crooked, took one look at the two of them sitting close in the tender gray light, and wisely busied herself with biscuits instead of questions. For a while they drank in silence. The Bell house, without the noise of boarders and wagons, felt intimate in a way Eli had never allowed himself to notice before. He could hear the soft scrape of Clara's thumb against the cup handle, the faint crackle from the stove, Annie muttering at the biscuit dough. Ordinary sounds. Precious sounds. At last Clara said, "Most men would have offered to pay the levy by now. Most men would be fools. Most men would expect something in return." He looked at her directly. "I'm not paying Avery a dime." "No," she held his gaze. "You're not." The truth of that seemed to settle her. She rested both hands around the cup, warming them. "I have run this house 6 years. Since my father died. Books, hiring, supplies, repairs, every boarder, every account. I did it because I had to and because I could. Somewhere in the doing, I stopped expecting anyone to notice." "I noticed," Eli said. "I know." Her voice softened, not weak, just honest. "That's what made you dangerous." He almost smiled. "I've been called worse. When you first came in," she went on, "you paid an exact coin, thanked Annie by name, and fixed the stable latch without announcing it. I thought, there is a man who sees work even when it belongs to someone else. That kind of attention is rarer than money." He looked down at his scarred hands. Frayed hands. Rope-burned, iron-marked. "I should have said something sooner." "Yes." The bluntness of it nearly made him laugh. "How soon?" "4 months ago." He looked up sharply. She was not smiling now. "You counted too?" he asked. "I count everything." That was Clara Bell entire, he thought. Every penny. Every board. Every silence. He reached into his vest pocket and drew out an old iron trade token, worn smooth with years. On one side was a balance scale. On the other, a number 1 stamped deep. "My father carried this," he said. He said a balance meant fairness goes both ways. A man who only gives or only takes is lying about something. "I've had it 12 years. He set it on the table between them. Clara looked at it a long time. Then she reached into her apron pocket and laid her father's silver button beside it. 2 small objects. 2 dead men. 2 living people trying not to say too much too fast. "My father said the only marriage worth having," she said softly, "was one where both people brought something real to the table and weren't ashamed of it. Not money. Not land. The actual truth of who they were." "What would you bring?" Eli asked. She met his gaze without flinching. "Stubbornness. Loyalty. A roof that doesn't leak. An opinion on every subject. Enough love to make a house feel like one." He nodded slowly. "That's a decent list. What about you?" "Work. Patience on most days. A temper on some. 2 freight wagons. 1 mule smarter than I am." And he paused. The intention to come home. That changed her expression. Home. Not stop. Not visit. Home. Annie quietly slid a tray of biscuits onto the table, then vanished again with such exaggerated innocence that Clara almost laughed despite herself. The laugh did not fully arrive, but its shadow warmed the room. "After this is settled," Eli said, "I mean to ask you properly." "Properly how?" "Without broken windows. Without a marshal at the door. Maybe outdoors, if the weather behaves." "It won't." "Then indoors with better timing." She touched the iron token with one finger. "Acceptable." He leaned back. 2 weeks. 10 days. Negotiating already? Always. Before he could answer, hooves sounded in the street. Fast, sharp, 1 rider only. Eli rose at once and crossed to the window. Doss Harlan, an old freighter he trusted, pulled up in a spray of mud and swung down. Eli stepped onto the porch while Clara stayed inside the doorway, Close enough to hear. Doss spat rainwater and said, Cottle drank hard last night. Harder than usual. I can get him talking by evening, maybe sooner. You think he knows about the grave? Eli asked. Doss's lined face hardened. He knows enough to be ashamed, which is the nearest that kind ever gets to conscience. Get it from him, Eli said. Doss glanced past him at Clara. Avery's setting heavier men on the streets. This won't stay quiet. It already isn't, Clara said. Doss nodded once, then rode off. Eli turned back. Clara had come onto the porch now, shawl gathered tight, morning light touching her face. You trust him? With my freight and my life, though not with card games. That sounds specific. It is. For one moment. There on the porch with the clean smell of wet earth rising from the street. Danger still circling and yet held at the edges. They simply looked at each other. Then Clara said, quiet and direct, Be careful today. It was the plainest kindness anyone had given him in a long time. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat. You too. As he stepped off the porch, she caught his sleeve. Just for a second. Her hand warmed through the damp cloth. He looked down at it, then at her face. Come back, she said. He swallowed once. I mean to. He walked into the brightening street carrying that sentence like a promise. Behind him, the Bell House door closed softly, and for the first time in years the road ahead did not feel like the only place his life could go. Preacher Sykes read the levy notice twice, then laid it on his desk as if it offended him personally. This figure is fabricated, he said. Clara sat opposite him in the same hard chair she had occupied in Sunday lessons as a girl. Annie stood at the stove pretending not to listen and failing completely. Can it be challenged? Clara asked. It can be buried. Sykes adjusted his spectacles. The posted date predates the ordinance it cites. The calculation is false in 4 places. And the language authorizing seizure was copied from a county template Avery had no legal right to use. He looked up, eyes sharpening. Where is Mercer? Finding a man named Cottle. Then perhaps the Lord has decided to be dramatic. Sykes dipped his pen. I'll write the affidavit. Eli found Doss at the livery and spent 12 minutes giving him exactly what was needed and no more. By dusk, Doss returned with mud to his knees and a folded paper inside his coat. Harlan Cottle talked, he said. They gathered in the Bell House kitchen, Clara, Annie, Eli, Preacher Sykes, and Doss smelling of horse and cold tobacco. Doss laid the written statement on the table. Cottle had been hired by Avery through Pike to survey the Bell House boundaries, disturb Henry Bell's grave, remove 1 silver button as a warning, and report whether Clara had any frequent mail company with money or standing. He had also been promised another job after Sunday, one he refused to describe except to say it would have left no argument after. Clara went very still. Annie swore under her breath. Eli felt something cold and clean settle inside him. Sykes folded the statement. That's enough. No, Eli said. It's enough to start. The next morning he walked into Avery's office with Sykes on one side and County Recorder Marsh on the other. Clara had wanted to come. Eli had said no, not because he doubted her courage, but because Avery needed to see the structure falling without having her in the room to sneer at. Avery sat behind his desk, vest neat, beard trimmed, expression arranged. Pike stood in the corner by the file cabinet, thick hands folded over his belt. Marsh placed the affidavit and the recorder's copies of Clara's old tax filings on the desk. Sykes added Cottle's signed statement. Avery looked at the papers. His jaw moved once. Marsh cleared his throat. This levy is void. The filing dates are fraudulent. The seizure language is unauthorized. And if this witness statement is accurate, you used town office to support intimidation, grave desecration, and attempted coercion. Pike shifted. Avery did not look at him. Sykes spoke next, voice quiet as a knife laid on wood. Withdraw the notice now, or I carry these papers to the commissioner by noon and let the territory decide how much dignity remains in your badge. For a long moment nobody in the room moved. Avery had built himself carefully in Dry Hollow. Storefront by storefront. Debt by debt. Favor by favor. Men like him did not believe they could lose to people who loved things honestly. They mistook restraint for weakness every time. He reached for the levy notice. The document is withdrawn, he said. Write it, Marsh replied. Avery wrote. The scratch of his pen across the paper was the best sound Eli had heard in years. Pike finally spoke. This isn't over. Eli looked at him. For you it might be. Something in his face must have reached Pike Plain, because the deputy went silent. When they came out onto the boardwalk, the whole town seemed sharper in the morning light. Wagons, dogs, steam rising from fresh horse dung, the smell of bread from the bakery. Life going on, unaware that one rotten thing had just cracked. Clara was standing on the Bell house porch across the street. She knew by the way they walked. By the time Eli crossed to her, she was already halfway down the steps. They met in the muddy street with the ordinary morning moving around them. For 1 second neither spoke. Then she asked, "Done?" "Done." He held her eyes. "The notice is withdrawn. Cottle's statement is on record. Avery can still bite, but not without breaking his own teeth." Relief moved through her like sunlight through deep water. Slow, visible, unmistakable. Her shoulders lowered. Breath left her. Annie, still on the porch, began crying with such shameless intensity that Sykes pretended to adjust his spectacles so nobody would notice he had tears himself. Clara laughed then, finally, helpless and bright. Eli thought it might be the finest sound he had ever heard. He reached into his vest pocket and took out the iron trade token. "You said 10 days, she murmured. "I've reconsidered the schedule." "To when?" "Now." He placed the token in his palm between them. "Clara Bell, I am not asking because Avery threatened you. I am asking because for months I have been looking for reasons to stay, and every road I took turned back here." He swallowed once. "I have work, patience on most days, a temper on some, and a strong wish to build something honest with you. Will you marry me?" The street did not stop for them. A wagon rolled by. A child ran laughing after a dog. Somewhere above, the mockingbird in the mulberry tree changed songs. Clara looked at the token, then at him. Slowly she reached into her apron pocket and drew out her father's silver button. She placed it in Eli's hand and closed his fingers over it. "Yes," she said. "Just that. No flourish. No tears. Only truth." He laughed once, low and disbelieving, and the look on his face made Annie cry harder. Sykes removed his hat. Doss, who had appeared at the edge of the crowd as if all true drifters knew when a story was ending, grinned like a fox. 3 weeks later they were married in the little church at the edge of town, while rain-washed sunlight came through the windows in bars of gold. Annie stood beside Clara, beaming through tears. Doss wore a coat that had clearly lost a fight with moths. Sykes performed the ceremony as though he were personally defying half the territory. Avery did not attend. Pike left Dry Hollow before winter. They burned the false levy notice in the Bell house stove that evening. Clara watched until every black curl of paper collapsed into red ash. Eli stood beside her, shoulder touching hers, and neither said much. They did not need to. Years later, when travelers stopped at the Bell house for coffee and a bed, they would sometimes notice 2 odd things displayed together on the mantel above the dining room stove: an old iron trade token stamped with a balance scale, and a single silver button polished bright by careful hands. If they asked, Annie, older then, married herself, still incapable of telling a short version of any story, would smile and say the token was the promise and the button was the warning that failed. But the truest part was simpler than that. Every morning, before the boarders came down, Clara set a cup of real coffee at Eli's elbow. Every evening, no matter how late his freight returned, he checked the stable latch before coming in. In a hard country, they built their tenderness out of repetition, loyalty, and attention. And on quiet nights, when the house had finally gone still and the prairie wind moved soft through the cottonwoods, the silver button at Clara's throat would touch her wedding ring and make the faintest sound in the dark, like a kept promise catching the light.